We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, for Point of View. It's our Memorial Day weekend edition, and we're going to start just talking about a little bit about patriotism and the ability to thank our military for what they've done. And with me in studio is Dr. Merrill Matthews. Thanks for being here.
Glad to be here.
And Kelly Shackelford. And Kelly, I know that there's one case that you won, First Liberty won at the Supreme Court a few years ago. And I think it's just such a wonderful case to talk about today on Memorial Day. It's the Bladensburg Peace Cross that's there in the state of Maryland. Tell us about that win and what it means for us as we think about Memorial Day.
Well, you know, some people forget that Memorial Day is not Veterans Day.
Right.
It's Memorial Day. It's people who've given their lives for our country. And it's a great example. You know, in World War I mean, there were a lot of lives lost. Mm-hmm. I mean, millions upon millions of lives lost. And in one community right outside of D.C., in Bladensburg, Maryland, mothers got together to remember their sons who they had lost, and they put up a memorial. And what they did is they put a memorial that was very much like what they were seeing in the pictures, because they were burying all these American soldiers overseas.
All around Europe?
Yes. There were. If you go and you find any symbols for World War I, it's a cross. There, you could just see, they would see pictures of just grave after grave after grave, just crosses as far as you could see. And so when they put up something to remember, they did this with the American Legion. They put up the Peace Cross is what it's called. And one of the neat things is, back at this period of time, I mean, we had 30,000 people from the Klan marching on D.C., okay? The troops were segregated back then.
Really?
Yet this Peace Cross had the list of every person who died from Prince George's County in alphabetical order. Didn't matter, black, white, not segregated, all just treated the same.
And it was created by their moms.
It was created by moms. And it sat there, and what happened is, over time, outside of D.C., as you can imagine, roads were built, and eventually the government said, you know, this is right next to the highway now, and we're gonna by eminent domain, we're gonna take over this land just to try to make sure that we don't have traffic and other things, because we got all these roads coming through here, and so, but they didn't, you know, mess with the Peace Cross or the other memorials that were in that area. And then here comes along, about, I don't know, what was it, 15 years ago, the American Humanist Association. Mm-hmm. You can't have this cross on government land. And they filed a lawsuit. And believe it or not, at the Court of Appeals, I mean, one of the federal Court of Appeals judges literally said during the oral argument, why don't we just cut the arms off the cross? That way we won't offend anybody and we won't have to tear it down.
That was ridiculous.
And we knew at that point we were in trouble with that panel. And they ruled 2-1 after almost 100 years that was unconstitutional to have a cross. And we went to the Supreme Court. And we had a challenge. We challenged kind of the whole Lemon test, which had been used to be so hostile to religion that leads to these kind of absurd results. And we ended up getting, it was almost 100 years from when the moms did this, we got a victory at the Supreme Court. And that Bladensburg Peace Cross is still there, and still those names on there, and it still stands. So it's a great reminder of our country and what people gave, and that there are people who would like to erase our history if it's inconvenient to them, if they see a religious symbol, or which I've never understood. I mean, if you saw a memorial and it was like a Star of David, and it was honoring Jewish people who had died in the war, why would you want to tear that down?
Yeah.
But this shows the They're really
The animosity.
intolerance. Yes, the people that want to erase any sort of faith from the public square. But it's up. You can go outside of D.C. in Bladensburg, Maryland, and you will see the Bladensburg Peace Cross still there.
You can drive by it. A good friend of mine lived in Maryland, and he's now here, and he's a supporter of Point of View. And he was just following this case so closely because he used to drive by the cross on the way to work.
Memorial Day also reminds us of Carry the Load movement.
Yes.
That goes on. It starts April 28, but it ends on Memorial Day. People across the country marching, walking long distances. They usually end up in a city having a ceremony on Memorial Day, but that's sort of for the veterans also, but it's also for first responders. So people who have been engaged in that jump in the line. They walk for miles in many cases, and it's a great time.
So many people to thank, and on Memorial Day, we do thank our military heroes for their sacrifice, especially the ones who never made it home. And this is, a long weekend, families and all of that. And it's kind of early. Memorial Day weekend seems real early this year. But just remember, throughout your weekend when you're having fun, remember to be grateful for those who have died for us. And
they want us to, and look, it's not that we're not going to have fun. We should have fun. That's why they fought.
That's why they fought.
Right? But yeah, remembering is really important. And as we're going to talk about here in a little bit, these big constitutional cases, that's what they fought for, is us to have the freedoms that we have and these constitutional rights that we have.
And, we might want to remember, we're old enough to remember back in the 60s when people would come, military would come back from Vietnam, and they would be spat on and cursed and everything by liberals who did not think they should be doing that. So it's a complete reversal. Now you even hear Democrats say, thank you for your service, if somebody's testifying before Congress and things like that. They'll do that. But there was a time not that long ago where they didn't do that.
Yes, and what I love right now, just under the new administration, that the military is actually becoming a place where people want to come back and actually serve and work.
Exceeding recruitment goals again and so forth. So that's a real plus.
Absolutely.
Truly is. So in the next segment, we're going to start with some of these there's so many momentous things that happen every week. And this week was a Supreme Court deadlock. And I have to ask Kelly about, why we don't even know what justices voted which way on this particular case. But it's one that First Liberty was involved in via just filing an important brief. And it turns out it was the issue was creating the first religious public school. In other words, a charter school was to be run by a Catholic organization and in the state of Oklahoma. And the Supreme Court, because of the deadlock, it's not going to happen. So we're going to talk about the implications of that. And then later in the program, we're going to talk about the big, beautiful bill that the House passed and the good and the bad. The good thing that I think about it is it's defunding Planned Parenthood. It's a very strong defund of Planned Parenthood, which is a good thing. But it spends a lot of money, and we will talk about that. And there are perhaps ways the Senate's going to change it. We will see. But certainly making the tax cuts permanent is an important part of it. And so, this is how the sausage is made, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we'll discuss the horrible, horrible shooting outside in Washington, D.C., of two young workers that are supporters of Israel. So, it's really another terrorist act and an act of religious persecution. And so we'll discuss that after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
This year marks the 50th anniversary of the U.S. government closing the gold exchange window and putting the world on a fiat monetary system. That is how Safadine Amos begins his book, The Fiat Standard. His earlier book, The Bitcoin Standard, was a best-selling book that has been translated into more than 25 languages. He argues that by first understanding the operation of Bitcoin, can someone then better understand the equivalent operations in fiat. It is easier to explain an abacus to a computer user than to explain a computer to an abacus user. Why the complexity? The reason is simple. The fiat standard we use today was not a carefully constructed economic system. It was not a deliberately designed operating system like Bitcoin. Rather, it evolved through a complex process of compromise between political constraints and expedience in managing government default. The impact of fiat currency is that it affects what economists describe as time preference. A person with high time preference focuses on present needs, while a person with low time preference is willing to delay present gratification and places more emphasis on future needs. When the world was on a gold standard, people knew that money would hold its value in the future. This enticed people to save. But when the countries moved to a fiat currency, the value of the currency declined and there was less inclination to save. His book describes how the fiat standard has affected our lives today. He provides detailed explanations for why the quality of the buildings we construct and the goods we buy are declining. This is due to our declining dollar. Read his book so that you can understand his diagnosis and his remedy. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of Patriot Preachers, go to viewpoints.info/Patriot Preachers. Viewpoints.info/Patriot Preachers. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter in studio with Dr. Merrill Matthews and Kelly Shackelford. And there was a case that actually we don't know exactly what would have happened if all the justices had been involved, because Amy Coney Barrett recused herself from this case, I think partly because she knew one of the parties involved. This case has to do with the first charter school in the nation that was going to be religious, and it was in the state of Oklahoma. And so, Kelly, tell us a little bit about the brief that First Liberty Institute filed with regard to this.
We filed on behalf of the chairman of education of the state of Oklahoma. So, this case is so weird on so many levels. So let me try to tick through a few of the weird things. First, you got the governor who's totally in favor of this, but the attorney general, who's a Republican, is the guy who caused all these problems. Drummond, one of my least favorite attorney generals of anybody who would call himself a Republican around the country. He's done some things that are definitely off. And so you had this kind of weird situation already. And what it is really about is, there's charter schools. I think 46 states have charter schools. And that's where the government funds the school, but lets somebody else control it, like a nonprofit or whatever. And it gives different options and competition to the other public schools.
And there's all kinds of reasons for a charter school.
Absolutely.
You can be a STEM school. You can be an arts type emphasis. Lots of different reasons.
And so, we at First Liberty won a case just a few years ago called Carson versus Macon. And what that case said is, look, when you have a school choice situation where money is being provided, you can't say you can pick any school except for the religious schools. That's unconstitutional. Same argument here, right? If you're going to allow charter schools, you can't say, but we're not going to allow a Catholic charter school. And so that was the argument. And weird thing number two is Amy Coney Barrett recused herself. Well, okay, why would she? Most people think she recused herself because one of the attorneys for the Catholic school was the Notre Dame Clinic. And one of her close friends is an attorney, it's a professor Nicole Garrett, is an attorney there. And so that's what people are guessing, that she recused herself. Well, okay, number one, that's weird.
How come?
You don't recuse yourself because a friend is involved in the case. I mean, Justice Scalia has talked about this before he passed. He said, well, that's nutty. Nobody does that
because everybody knows everybody in D.C.
Yeah, and think of you're an attorney in a small community. I mean, you're friends with all kinds of people. The idea that the attorney has to, that a judge has to recuse himself if there's a friend who's an attorney, it would mean they couldn't practice. So the only recusal things are like, well, I have a financial interest in this. I own stock in this company I'm ruling for, right? Or this is my wife, or this is my husband. That, okay, there's some issue, but people would say no even to that. But the point is, never do you do it because you're a friend. So this is really bizarre. And then it gets bizarre, number 3. They don't issue a ruling. They issue a non-ruling. They say 4-4. And by the way, there are 3 liberals on the court and 6 conservatives. And so they say 4-4 because there's 1 gone. Now you just have 8. And they do it in what's called a per curiam, meaning nobody puts their name to anything.
So we don't even know.
So you don't know who the 4 are. Now you
You kind of know who the 3 of the 4 are.
You've got to guess who the 4th is. Probably the Chief Justice, but nobody knows.
Maybe Gorsuch, though.
But you only, and usually you only issue a per curiam decision when it's something small, or it's like everybody agrees. There's no need to put your name on an opinion. So this is really strange that they would issue a per curiam decision. The effect of all this is, yes, in this case in Oklahoma, the Catholic school did not win at this point. But there's no decision. I mean, it doesn't have any analysis. It doesn't lay anything. It doesn't set any precedent, which means they just punted this to another day. There's going to be another case at some point. It's going to go back up. It'll probably have all 9 justices, and that's when the decision will be made. So this is really strange, and I don't like it because I would disagree with the ruling, if they ruled even substantively, but I really don't like it because of the way they did it.
Interesting.
I think that it feels very political to me, and I usually don't say that about this court. The idea that they wouldn't put their names and be out there, and this feels like a deal. It feels like politics. Judges should say, here's my opinion, here's what I believe, and they should lay it out in public. And if they're not willing to do that, they shouldn't be a judge. That's part of being a judge. And we didn't get any analysis. We got nothing. We just got to think we'll punt on this case. And by the way, we're not going to tell you which 4 were one side and which 4 were the other. Now, I just don't think that's what the courts should do.
I posted an article out of the Washington Post on this at pointofview.net, and one of the paragraphs is the Roberts Court has been actually, this is somebody else that they've quoted, but that's saying the Roberts Court has been extremely solicitous of free exercise claims over the years. That's why you kind of expected this charter school to go forward. And this one did not prevail. I view this as a really significant decision, and I'm sure there are many people in the education world who view it as a bullet dodged. In other words, the charter schools are supposed to be non-sectarian in the conventional wisdom. But Kelly, why is that not constitutional? Why should a charter school have the right to be based on a church or church doctrine?
Because once the government creates a program where the government says, we're not going to control this, we're going to let different people control these things so that we have different options, we have some competition, some variety, etc. The idea is once you open it up, you can't treat people differently because of their religion. And if this had not been a Catholic school, they could have done everything this Catholic school did, they'd be allowed. It's only because they're Catholic that they're not being allowed. And so it's discrimination. It's clear discrimination, and I think you'll eventually this will be upheld. You don't have to create a charter school system, just like you don't have to create a school choice system. But once you do, you can't discriminate against the Christian schools or the Catholic schools or the Protestant schools or the Jewish schools. You You can't do that. That's
So,
what this is about.
A question. My recollection is it's fairly unusual for a judge to recuse himself. Is that fair?
Very, very much so.
And secondly, sometimes they decide not to take a case, and the thinking is they don't take the case on their docket because they're looking for a better case to be
Yes.
able to come along and make a decision one way or the other. If they're doing a 4-4 decision, it sounds like that's not the case here. But is there any? I mean, is there a chance that this could end up being we want a better case to come up to make a decision on?
I don't think that's why they did this. I think somebody made a mistake, right? I mean, it only takes 4 justices to say we want this case, right? They get 7,000 to 8,000 requests a year. They took 58 last year, so they're taking very few. So I clearly think the 4 who said yes, let's take this case, I think they were surprised by it. I have a feeling they were surprised that Amy Coney Barrett recused herself. I bet they were probably surprised that whether it was Chief Justice Roberts or somebody else, I bet they were surprised there. So I think they were surprised because you wouldn't take a case if you knew it was going to be 4-4 and you were going to issue no opinion. So I think they were surprised.
I just wonder why we don't get to know.
Only because they chose to do this.
Okay.
And see, per curiam does happen. You'll see a decision. It'll be something no controversial.
This is big.
Right? Yeah, and certainly not a Supreme Court case that's like big like this. And there won't be a need to list the people because they all agree or everybody's on the same page. It's per curiam. So we don't need to list anybody because it's the whole court. That's what you normally do.
The Supreme Court's pretty good about stopping leaks that don't come out very often. Is it possible that sometime in the next month or two we get a leak saying, here's what the justices, here's how they decided on this?
It's possible, I mean, there are people already speculating that there was a deal made, and that you'll see some weird conglomeration in another case where like a liberal goes over to the conservative side, or something you don't expect. And again, that's why I don't like it. I just think you should lay out your opinions. But what they really did is they decided ultimately, and I don't have a problem with this, that we're not deciding this now. It's 4-4, so we'll just wait for another day, and then we'll do all of our analysis.
Okay, I wonder how soon that day will come. Well, next up, we're going to talk about the fact that President Trump appointed an archbishop who banned Nancy Pelosi from taking communion, to an advisory board on religious liberty. Kelly knows a lot about that. Buddy and I will ask him a few questions about it right after this.
Many years ago, they began saying that we live in the information age. Well, today there is so much information coming at us from every direction. The hardest thing is to discern which issues are really important and how can I make a positive impact without wasting my time trying to figure out accurate information. Let me give you a suggestion to help with that. Visit pointofview.net. Look at the tabs across the top. Find the one named Viewpoints. Kirby Anderson and others on our team are constantly watching for news to identify those issues that you really need to know about. They boil things down in a brief summary, and then you can decide if it's something on which you want to learn more and get involved. Again, when you go to pointofview.net, click on Viewpoints, you'll see exactly what I mean. You'll see the issues that we are covering right now. And when you like what you see, I honestly think you will, you can slide on over, enter your email, and get them automatically sent to your inbox each day. That's it. Take a minute now, be informed. Pointofview.net, click on Viewpoints. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
And Kelly Shackelford and Dr. Merrill Matthews. And Buddy, I don't know if you've been in studio with Kelly since he was appointed by President Trump to the White House Religious Liberty Commission. I have not. I don't think I've seen you since then, Kelly. So
my wife says too these days.
You're so busy. Well, I think there was a Friday where you were supposed to be in, and instead you were in D.C. So that was pretty exciting. This Religious Liberty Commission is exciting, and the idea there's an advisory board to it. Now, I think do you have to be confirmed?
No, it's the president's committee, and so the president issued an executive order. What you're referring to, it was in National Day of Prayer in the Rose Garden at the White House. And he created the commission. There's never been ever before a commission on religious liberty for the United States. And we have done a commission for international, like the attacks that are going on against religious freedom, but we've never done one on the United States. And it's a neat, as Trump, very Trump-like. It's a very mixed group on the as commissioners. You got Franklin Graham,
Paula White, Kelly Shackelford,
and you got Cardinal Dolan.
Yeah,
right. So you got one of the top Catholic leaders, top evangelical leaders, and so just it's Ben Carson is on there. So it's very interesting group. Eric Metaxas, just. It'll be fascinating. And what they said they wanted done was, in the executive order, is we'll be holding hearings to really kind of look at and really educate the whole country on things that are really going on. They might hear about a Supreme Court case, but they don't hear about all the other stuff, whether it's in healthcare, and think about all the people that lost their jobs because they didn't get a religious exemption, right? Think of parental rights with these cases and what's going on in our schools all across the country. We could go on and on, right? The military, what happened to the SEALs, what's happening with chaplains. I mean, there's a lot of issues that can be exposed. And then at the end of the whole process, after we've really pulled all the information up, our job is to make recommendations to the president on things that he can do that would really improve religious freedom protection in the United States. And
so, Buddy, when you think about this, I mean, we've had the commission that's the International Religious Liberty Commission. I think Sam Brownback was the first head of it. And so we thought, okay, in America, we're okay.
and we're not okay anymore, especially with the attacks on Jews going on.
Yes.
And synagogues. I mean, and of course, the shooting of the two young people outside of the Jewish Museum, I believe it was.
Yes.
It has become, traditional religion has become under threat. Christianity from the academics, Jewish from Palestinian people and Muslims and even liberals. I mean, it's amazing how we've seen this change over the time.
Yeah, very quickly.
It'll be a great opportunity. I mean, we've never had a commission on religious liberty before, and there's some things I can't talk about yet because I'm still hoping we can. There's certain things I'm hoping we can do that'll make it a little more electric. A little more interesting.
We'll be waiting.
But we're going to do everything we can to really cover the issues, help Americans understand. I mean, New York Times is like you were saying when you were reading the article a little earlier, Penna. It's like, they're winning all these cases at the Supreme Court. So religious freedom's won 11 of the last 14 cases or
because
whatever.
We fought.
Yeah, but that's just the Supreme Court, right? I mean, how many thousands and thousands of cases? I mean, think of Arlene's Flowers, right? Think of the Kleins. I mean, we could go through all the COVID situations where the churches had to be closed and the synagogues had to be closed, but the Walmart and the liquor store was open, right? And nobody won those cases. You couldn't get anything to the Supreme Court. I think that a total of 14 emergency motions to open churches to the Supreme Court, and the church basically went 12-2. the wrong way, 12 against, 2-4. So there's all these things that we need to talk about and we need to get solutions for so that we don't have these things happen to Americans again. So it'll be a great opportunity. And also on the as commissioners there's a rabbi who's very well known. There's just it's a mix of folks. But I think and Dr. Phil.
Yes.
So
Trump called him up to speak that day in the Rose Garden.
I think it's great. I think it's great to have different varieties of society, ways to get the information out, and there's going to be hearings, and I'm hoping I would guess that they're going to be televised so people could watch, and I think hopefully our first hearing is going to be in June. And you mentioned Archbishop Cordileone and some others.
Why is there an advisory board? Is that an advisory board to you or just to add more people?
It.
Yes.
Because Trump wants to get more Christians on.
It's not the commissioners. It's just an advisory board.
Okay.
It's kind of like, a group of respect. And the Archbishop is really a great person. I've spent some time with him before. He's been very strong on the moral issues, the biblical issues, and in fact, paid a price really within the Catholic Church because of that. With the last pope, he was passed over for the cardinal position because he was so strong. And it was given instead to another bishop that was underneath him who had said that climate change was more important than sanctity of life issues. And so it was the woke stuff. And so he paid a price for that, right? And he's been really strong for a long time on the biblical issues, and so it's great to have people like him, people like Franklin Graham. I think Jack Graham was on there, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
Pastor Graham from Prestonwood. So it's a great list.
Who's been in the studio
people.
Many times.
Yeah. So it'll be. I asked point of view listeners for prayer and for wisdom. How to because we have a limited time. We're supposed to do all this and finish all the hearings and everything, and by July 4th next year,
For the 250th.
It's the 250th
Yep.
anniversary. So
wow, you're going to be busy.
yeah.
It may have to last longer. Let me ask you about this cardinal because he is he's in San Francisco.
Yes, can you imagine?
And this is Pelosi's congressional district.
That's
and
right.
in May 2021, he wrote a letter to pro-abortion Catholics. This is the quote from the letter. If you find that you are unwilling or unable to abandon your advocacy for abortion, you should not come forward to receive Holy Communion. And, of course, she has anyway. She's done it. But this is a strong stance.
Yes.
And this is probably what got him into some trouble, but
Yep.
I'm so I admire that.
Yeah.
And I wonder, I don't know enough about it, but if somebody's coming up and this person is, is the priest handing out the wafer and the cup, and this person is a pro-abortion person, can you pull back and not let the person have that? I don't know the answer to that.
You can do that. This is in San Francisco, of course, but she could go into D.C. somewhere and take communion. So that's what she did in defiance.
And I will say it wasn't that extreme, right? I mean, he literally wrote letters to her saying, you are publicly speaking in favor of ending innocent life, and I want to talk to you because this is not acceptable within the doctrine of the church. And so he didn't just kind of look at what she did and make a decision. He reached out to her a number of times and then eventually felt like she should not be receiving communion. And that was a big deal back then. And again, it cost him, but he was just trying to be faithful to what he's supposed to do. And he had had a lot of special training over in Rome in what we would call their court system about adjudicating things and what the Bible says and following those things.
So he's very well versed in that.
He is. So interesting. It'll be interesting under the new Pope, whether things have changed. I mean, supposedly the new Pope, while there are issues that you would think maybe he was a little on the left side, there are also issues where he's more traditional, such as marriage and LGBT issues and things and what the Bible says on those things. So we'll see. But Cordileone is definitely Archbishop Cordileone is definitely known for being really strong and staying with biblical principles on morality issues.
Since the new pope is an American, it would be interesting if Pope Trump were to send him a letter asking him to be on the advisory committee.
I doubt he has time.
I doubt he has time. But
that would be an
doesn't stop
interesting
you from
move.
asking. He is an American.
It wouldn't
Well, no
shock
way.
me if Trump did something like that.
When we had the Rose Garden ceremony, obviously you had Cardinal Dolan is on the
Yes.
committee. He was invited, but he got an excuse because he was at the conclave where they were picking the next
He was
pope.
picking the next pope. Wow. That's what we mean when we say there's a lot going on many levels. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there is a lot going on. And one of the things that's gone on this week is Congress passing this big, beautiful bill. I don't know how beautiful it is. I'm going to ask Dr. Matthe, since he's written on it. You might read his article during the break at pointofview.net, and we'll be right back. Planned Parenthood released its annual report right in the middle of House Republicans' effort to defund the organization. What timing? The report shows that in 2024, Planned Parenthood committed more abortions than the previous year and soaked in 13% more funding from the U.S. taxpayer. The $792 million U.S. taxpayers provided to Planned Parenthood is 39% of the organization's annual revenue. That makes the U.S. government Planned Parenthood's largest contributor. Planned Parenthood was responsible for 402,000 abortions last year, over 1,100 per day. Some states have zeroed out Planned Parenthood funding, but as the report points out, Planned Parenthood helps women from pro-life states travel to get abortions. The Hyde Amendment supposedly prevents taxpayers from having to fund abortions, but Planned Parenthood receives Medicaid funding, ostensibly to pay for certain health services for poor women. Provision of those services decreased significantly last year. Professor Michael New told the Washington Stand cancer screenings are down 8%, pap smears dropped 12%, and primary care visits declined 14%, while abortions increased. According to Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America, pregnant women seeking help at Planned Parenthood are sold an abortion 97% of the time, while prenatal services, miscarriage care, and adoption referrals make up a minuscule minority of the options they offer. As part of the budget reconciliation package, the House Energy and Commerce Committee approved language to end federal funding to any entity that performs or facilitates abortions. Planned Parenthood refers to itself as the nation's second largest provider of hormone therapy. The Daily Signal reported on Live Action's recent undercover investigations, which reveal that Planned Parenthood is providing minors with same-day prescriptions for cross-sex hormones. The reconciliation bill's language also removes funding for these gruesome activities. It's time for Congress to completely defund Planned Parenthood for good. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
When you talk about passing spending and budget bills, sometimes people's eyes glaze over, but there are so many issues within these bills that affect our lives that it's important to talk about it. This was a reconciliation bill, which means when the Senate votes on it, they don't have to get 60 votes.
Right.
They just have to get a majority to pass it. And the bill, it extends the president's tax cuts from 2017. It would have been a huge tax increase if you couldn't have done that.
Right.
So I think some of the House members were
for everybody, by the way,
right,
right?
for
I mean, they
everybody.
keep saying it's for the
No,
Democrats
everybody.
are like, oh, this is a great thing for the rich. No, it's everybody.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the Republicans, some of our friends in the Freedom Caucus and others, they think that it spends way too much, and it does. It spends too much. It doesn't cut enough. But there's just a very fine tightrope that has to be walked to get these things passed with all the people that are voting on it. It ends the taxes on tips and overtime also. It
up
raised,
to a certain point on tips, I think. Up to like $25,000, I believe. I think there's a cap on how much.
Okay. All right. I didn't
believe
know
that's right.
that. It also raises the standard deduction for seniors. It increases the child's tax credit. It defunds Planned Parenthood, which I'm thrilled about.
Like
that it's what I did.
Is it $800 million? I think I saw. That's how much defunding.
It's a lot of defunding. It's a lot. And Planned Parenthood has crept up. Its federal funding has crept up. And we'll talk a little bit later about the way they get that money. And it's usually by saying that they provide other services. Those services have been dropping and the abortions have been increasing in Planned Parenthood. But we have all that going on. And, one of the big battles, Dr. Matthews, was work requirements for Medicaid.
Right.
And so, most of us would just say, of course, you should require people to work. Able-bodied men should not receive Medicaid. It was never for them. So tell us about how that kind of shook out.
So originally, Medicaid was for low-income mothers with children. Then in 65, when it passed, then in the 70s, they expanded it to people who have disabilities and for people who are in nursing homes, low-income people who have to go into a nursing home. So they expanded it some. But that's kind of been the three. Plus, if you're a very poor senior on Medicare, Medicaid comes in and pays any premiums that you owe being on Medicare, any costs that you have there. So that's kind of the group that's concerned here. And what happened is it has expanded significantly. It had, I think, 71 million people in there in February 2020 when the pandemic hit. It went up to about 94 million people because under Biden, they expanded Medicaid significantly. It has gone back to about 78 million people. But just Medicaid covers so much in about 45% of the births in this country are paid for by Medicaid. In Texas, it's about half of every birth is paid for by Medicaid. In New Mexico, it's like 75% of every birth is paid for by Medicaid. It covers all kinds of things, and states have certain economic incentives to try to expand what Medicaid pays for. There's ways they jiggle with the taxes in there to expand it because Medicaid is a federal state program. The federal government gives money to the states and some restrictions and compliance things, and then the states get their own money and put towards it. And it's called a matching grant, but it's not really matching. About 5 or 6 states get 50-50. The federal government pays half of it, the states do. But all the way to Mississippi, the federal government pays about 71%. So if you're in Mississippi, if you're a state legislator in Mississippi, you have a reason to spend another dollar in Medicaid because the government's going to pay roughly 70% of that.
What about a state like Texas?
Texas is above 50%. I think it's like New York, New Jersey, and a few other. California are 50%. I don't remember what Texas is, but it's probably around, I think the average is about 60 to 61%. So states have an incentive because they're getting essentially a 50% discount for everything they spend money on, and they game the system to get more money back, which is why for decades Republicans had said Medicaid should be what we call block granted. That is to say, the federal government should say, okay, this is how much we gave each state in this year. We're going to start with a block grant. We're taking that money and we're giving it to the state, and then the state has the freedom and flexibility to do whatever it wants to. Now you don't have an incentive as a state to try to game the system. Here, you've got the money, and you can do what you want to with it with a few restrictions in there. So if you wanted to require work, you could as a state. If you want to expand it to illegal immigrants, as California has done, you could do that. I mean, you would have, but you got to pay the difference.
Yeah.
So that's you get the incentives right now. we're giving you this amount of money and you get to, if you can do what you want to. But they're not going that direction. I don't know why. So they're trying to impose a work requirement. Liberals come up and say, well, almost all of them work anyway, and those who don't work are basically are covered under the exemptions, like they have a disability, they're caring for somebody, something of that nature. In which case, if that's right, why are you opposing a work requirement? Because if you say almost everybody who can work is already working, why oppose it? But the real issue here, Republicans are using the work requirement to try to save money, to try to get people dropping out of the system. Democrats oppose it because they say it punishes the poor. But the reason you impose a work requirement is because you want people getting back to work.
But they're calling it a punishment.
They're
That's what the left
they
calls it.
absolutely call it a punishment.
It's a cut.
It's a cut.
Which is a joke. What a joke that
because
is.
all you have to do is decide you're going to work. But the way this works in welfare is when a state says you're going to have to work for your benefits, what they find is people who come wanting to get free money say, well, if I've got to work, I'll go out and get my own job. I don't want to have to work through the state for this. So you lose about 30% of the people who apply. And then you are able to start focusing on people who do have problems. There are low-income people, people with disabilities who have problems. So you impose a work requirement both to try to get rid of people who shouldn't be in there, because welfare is always a question of who should be in here and who shouldn't be in here. And how do we get the people out of here who shouldn't be in here so that we can focus on the people who should be? So that's one reason for the work requirement. The other is because many of these people have been out of work for years. They don't feel like they can hold a job. They may have lost some self-respect. They've lost job skills and so forth. So you sort of nudge them back into the workforce to help them begin to get a job.
Which is good for the society and good for them.
Good for the society. And my leftist friends don't seem to understand this. Karl Marx thought work was good for people. Go read your Karl Marx. He thought it took people and gave them dignity. And so we want to try to do that with people so that they're getting back to work.
Well, I would say that's a good idea. And today we have jobs out there that need people working in them. It's not as if we have an unemployment problem.
We have a 1 million person shortage in manufacturing. Trump's trying to bring back manufacturing, and manufacturers will say, we can't hire enough people. They won't, and if we hire them quickly, they drop out fairly quickly. It's a real problem. We need people to work.
We do need people to work, and, we need people to be getting married and forming families, and if men aren't working, they're not attractive husband material, and they don't even feel like they could get married. So there's just so many social problems that are exacerbated when we have this massive welfare state. And so I'm really... I'm kind of scratching my head why there isn't a stronger work requirement. Is there somewhat of a work requirement that was added in this bill? Yes,
they have, as I understand it, put it in there. They had done that back previously under the first Trump administration, and the Biden administration removed those. Okay. And that's the problem, is even if you pass a work requirement, then liberal bureaucrats and politicians at the state and local levels constantly try to find ways to let people around it so they don't actually have to work, to essentially water down the work requirements.
Amazing. Just amazing. Well, okay. We will continue to talk a bit about this big, beautiful bill and what's in it.
And some hidden things in it.
There's some hidden things in it, and we need to talk about that before we move on. We also need to talk about really this terrorist that killed these two young people about to be engaged, that were coming out of a meeting that was really for peace in the Middle East. And, these types of things are happening, and it's just heartbreaking. So stick with us. We've got a top of the hour break, and we'll be right back.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer. And that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner, Pray for America, right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View will continue after this.
I just wanted to tell you, too, how much I have appreciated Point of View over the years. I've always been taught that we take care of our own, and I feel like Point of View is one of our own because of the Christian worldview that you do promote. And so I have become a partner today, and I just want to thank you so much, and just God bless you for all that you do.
Listen, I wanted to make a quick comment. I'm a relatively new listener to the show, and I really kind of stumbled upon it more than anything because I'm doing some driving now that I wasn't in the past. And my comment really is, I think you guys and gals are more right on about the assessment of this country right now than anything I've heard. You know, I go home and I tell my wife, you've got to hear what they're talking about on the show. It's just so right on. And I tell my parents the same thing.
I'm 25 years old, and I started listening to Point of View about 4 years ago, and it has changed the way that I think and the way that I view the world around me.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Penna Dexter.
Welcome back. This is the second hour of Point of View, our weekend edition, also our Memorial Day edition. Kelly Shackelford and Merrill Matthews are in studio. And we're going to continue a little bit of discussion on the reconciliation bill because, we talked about how the tax cuts are going to be extended if the Senate passes this. And there'll be some spending cuts, but not enough, according to a lot of our friends. Mm-hmm. But also, there's some just hidden facets of this bill, Kelly. And so, interest groups are allowed to get so many things into bills. So what are you concerned about?
Well, the one of the big stories today in the legal arena is, I'm reading the headline from Newsweek: hidden provision in Trump's big bill could disarm U.S. Supreme Court. And what it's talking about is contempt. It said a provision hidden in the sweeping budget bill passed the U.S. House on Thursday seeks to limit the ability of courts, including the U.S. Supreme Court, from enforcing their orders. Here's what it says. No court of the United States may use appropriated funds to enforce a contempt citation for failure to apply with an injunction or temporary restraining order. So
translate.
What they're saying is the court it's only kind of enforcement power, because really it wasn't, the founders didn't want the courts to have enforcement power. But the only enforcement power is they can hold you in contempt if you don't, and they can try to enforce that, but not if they don't have any money to pay for any of the enforcement.
Is there any money in this bill?
Well, this bill is an appropriation. It's all the appropriations, and they basically can't use any money for enforcement. Now, I think that this is going to not make it through the Senate. It's going to violate the Byrd rule, which we don't want to get into all the details of that. But I think it's, at the very least, it's a shot across the bow to the Supreme Court to basically remind them that, they really do need to get these district court judges, kind of under control. Because right now we've got rule not by election, but rule by, local federal judge in some little place, and they keep doing this. And the court's overruling them a lot, and then sometimes they're not. And they've just got a mess. And I think this is a signal. But again, it's one of those things that is in the bill that people are just realizing was in, the big, beautiful bill.
So explain to us, where is the cost in holding somebody in contempt? If a judge says, I'm holding you in contempt, it doesn't cost anything to say that. So where does the cost come in?
The cost is the enforcement. But how do you enforce that? Well, you hire marshals, and you do things that cost money to enforce that they violated.
I would think that'd be a fairly small amount of money.
I don't think so. But you can't use a penny, though. So anything, and their appropriations are completely. This is the thing with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the only court created, number one. All the other courts are creation of Congress. Okay, this is the congressional appropriations bill.
But the Supreme Court is created by the Constitution.
The Congress could not say we're getting rid of the Supreme Court, but if they wanted to, they could end every federal court except for the Supreme Court. Also, though, all the funding comes from Congress. So Congress has a lot of control. Again, this is what the founders wanted. They did not want the Supreme Court. It's considered the weakest branch.
They are sort of wielding their power of late.
Yes.
To stymie the president and his agenda at every turn.
And look, I mean, we all understand the Constitution is there to protect people, but obviously you had a president elected by the people, and it's not like the stuff he's doing on immigration is like, I mean, people wanted something done about immigration, right? So you've got the entire country saying, do something about immigration. And then you've got, really mainly very liberal judges saying, well, I'm going to enjoin you from doing all that nationwide. Even though I'm in one little community and my jurisdiction is just here, I am going to become the president of the United States. And so it's the court knows it has to rein it back. And it just did that yesterday. We had the 4-4 ruling on the charter school, but at the same time, we had another ruling where, again, another district court judge had told Trump, you can't fire this person from the National Labor Relations Board. And the Supreme Court said, we're overruling the district court below because the executive, and this is true, if you look in the Constitution, Article 2, it says all power in the executive branch is in the president. The president controls the executive branch. And so they said in this case, he can fire whoever he wishes without cause. I mean, he can just say, I don't want you, if they're in the executive branch. Now, there's an exception. There's a deal called Humphrey's Executor, but it has been considered really big. Like, you can't fire any of these people in these certain agencies or whatever. But this Supreme Court obviously does not believe that they think that is very narrow. So what is now happening is they're having to overrule these local judges that tell the president he can't fire somebody. Again, it's kind of like pretend like you're the head of a company, and then some person from outside your company comes in and says, I'm not going to allow you to fire that person. And you're like, excuse me? This is my company. You can't tell me I can't fire this person because they're not doing a good job or whatever reason I want. I'm the one that's been put in charge of this country and company, and that's what's happening. You've got these judges who nobody elected, and they're just supposed to be in one district, basically controlling foreign policy, controlling the obviously. Now look, can the Trump administration go too far? Sure. And you'll see those, and some of those will make the Supreme Court, and they'll say, well, you got to do this. But they're going so over in what they're trying to tell the president to do. They're trying to tell him to turn planes around, all kinds of stuff. And their opinion of themselves is way too great, these district court judges. And there are many judges, like Judge Ho did an interview with the Wall Street Journal, and he pointed out, look, this is really strange what's going on. He said, because he's on the Federal Court of Appeals. He said, because it's just one judge doing this. There's
one judge and making a ruling.
Yeah,
really
they're
for the
not a
whole
3-judge
nation.
panel. He said, when we sit, we're with other judges. But for one judge to just make these decisions for the whole country, that really is never what was intended by our founder.
So the question I raise is on the legislation that sets up some of these agencies and so forth, it usually says in there that the person is appointed by the president, and that person is going to be able to stay there unless he can't be fired except for cause, which normally means they've done their corruption, they're not doing their job or something of that nature. So at least from my standpoint, not being a judge, I could see a judge seeing this and said, well, this is a law and this was signed by a president whenever that went through. Yes. So unless you override that law or do something with that law, I'm not sure how you are allowed to fire that person when the law says this. So that's the tension I see in there.
Certain agencies have that provision.
Right.
In the way they were set up.
The way they were set up, and that's a legal thing.
Yeah, and
still the president has power. So where's that land?
I talked about this the last couple of months on Point of View. I said, I think all these lawsuits are going to backfire on the liberals who want to protect, civil service protection, federal employee protection, can't fire people from agencies. This court is going to say the Constitution says the president controls the executive branch, and they're going to tee up a lot of these issues. And I think they're not going to like the change in the law that's going to occur.
There's a lot riding on this. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
This year marks the 50th anniversary of the U.S. government closing the gold exchange window and putting the world on a fiat monetary system. That is how Saifedean Ammous begins his book, The Fiat Standard. His earlier book, The Bitcoin Standard, was a best-selling book that has been translated into more than 25 languages. He argues that by first understanding the operation of Bitcoin, can someone then better understand the equivalent operations in fiat. It is easier to explain an abacus to a computer user than to explain a computer to an abacus user. Why the complexity? The reason is simple. The fiat standard we use today was not a carefully constructed economic system. It was not a deliberately designed operating system like Bitcoin. Rather, it evolved through a complex process of compromise between political constraints and expedience in managing government default. The impact of fiat currency is that it affects what economists describe as time preference. A person with high time preference focuses on present needs, while a person with low time preference is willing to delay present gratification and places more emphasis on future needs. When the world was on a gold standard, people knew that money would hold its value in the future. This enticed people to save. But when the countries moved to a fiat currency, the value of the currency declined and there was less inclination to save. His book describes how the fiat standard has affected our lives today. He provides detailed explanations for why the quality of the buildings we construct and the goods we buy are declining. This is due to our declining dollar. Read his book so that you can understand his diagnosis and his remedy. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view of Patriot Preachers, go to viewpoints.info/Patriot Preachers. Viewpoints.info/Patriot Preachers. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm Penna Dexter. Dr. Merrill, Matthe, and Kelly Shackelford are with me. We've been talking about judges and injunctions and blocking the president's agenda. And in one of those areas where the president is trying to cut big time is the Department of Education. And he has actually let a lot of people go. And now there's a judge out there named, I can't even pronounce it, Myung Zhao, who has an affinity for hating law enforcement. And he's also a DEI judge. He's blocked President Trump's executive order to shut down the Department of Education. And he's trying to also block just dismantling it and firing people there. So what's happened is this decision that came from this judge, Myung J. Zhao of the U.S. District Court for the District of Massachusetts, it was a preliminary injunction, meaning it will remain in force until the case is resolved or a higher court overturns. This is kind of what usually happens, isn't it?
Yeah, it says while we've got to sort of set the, what is the status quo throughout the case. But when you issue those rulings, you're saying there's a likelihood that this party is going to win on the merits. So you're kind of tipping your hand, you are, in this case, especially with the district court judge, as to where he's going to go. But, that gets appealed, and then you've got the Court of Appeals, and you got the Supreme Court. And that's why they have to keep doing these things right now, is there are so many of these judges doing these. Look, the Department of Education was created by Congress. So I think it was a mistake. There's nothing in the Constitution about the federal government having any sort of authority over education, but Congress created this, and so the president can't can't just say there's no more Department of Education.
But he can cut it down.
But sure he can. Yeah, he can move things around. He can let a number of people go. He can, so he does have power. So these attempts to say that he can't do things, I think, for the most part, are going to be overturned as long as he doesn't go too far with some of these things.
And I think this is one I like it when Congress follows up with the will of President Trump or an executive order that he has issued, and they pass legislation. Mm-hmm. And on this front, it would be very popular, I think. There are some people and educators and people who are beholden to teachers' unions that don't want to do anything with the Department of Education. But I think a lot of parents are starting to see that we don't really want the federal government telling our local schools.
And I think the Department of Education is mostly function of handing money out to colleges and universities. So I agree with you. I would just assume they had never started. I think it did under Carter, if I remember right. Yeah. And there's no constitutional provision for that. The question comes about, as Kelly says, if it's created, can you just stop it? And then the other question that's emerging as a discussion point is, can the president impound funds? So if Congress has spent money, has allocated money to the Department of Education, can the president just say, I'm not going to spend that money? Or as some will say, well, no, Congress allocated that money. That money has to be spent. And I think that's another question that's going to be ultimately go to the Supreme Court. And I have no idea how the Supreme Court will rule on that.
Yeah, my guess is they would say, they're not going to agree in general with impounding, right? And that the authority in the Constitution over money is Congress. Now, that doesn't mean that he can't use it in a way that maybe they weren't thinking about, but they weren't real specific about how to use the money because they usually aren't. So he could do a lot of things. But I do think, Congress is the one with the power of the purse, with the power to decide where the money goes. And so I think ultimately that's where those cases will end up. And then on the other side, education and the president, this thing with him revoking Harvard's ability to do visas, that's where the president has a lot of authority, right? I mean, it's foreign policy. It's the executive branch that decides whether you get a visa or not. It's not the courts. And so for the Trump administration to say to Harvard, you're refusing to give us information on the people that we have given visas to that are at your school, then I think it's very reasonable for the Trump administration, as they did, to say, you're not getting any more visas.
What do you think about that?
I tend to agree with Kelly on that. The Trump administration, is over the immigration and people who come here and get visas. So I do think Trump is trying to give Harvard a hard time on some things. And we talked about this.
He's trying to hit him where it hurts.
Try to hit him where it hurts. And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago because in that letter from the Trump administration to Harvard, they went in and they went through there and said, you're going to have to set up a committee to oversee. You're going to have to give the federal audits the ability of who you're hiring, what they believe, and so forth. And we're going to do that with your students also. And we're going to do this with the classes. And we want to make sure that there's religious diversity of opinion in these things. And I said, this is a bit of an intrusion in here because they included Harvard Divinity School. And the question that always rises to me is, if a liberal comes in, if a Democrat comes in next time, are they going to be able to say, well, Dallas Theological Seminary, you're going to let us you're going to have a diverse faculty, you're going to have a diverse population, and we're going to enforce diversity at your school. And they have to sign forms there. They're looking for a religious conformity at DTS on certain positions, not diversity. So I'm concerned that this could be taken a little bit too far. So that's my biggest concern there. You can say Harvard deserves that. I'm fine with that, but it always sets the precedent. Can the next person come in and go a bit further?
Yeah, I mean, when you have a school, really considered one of the schools everybody wants to get into, right? At Harvard, and was it 37?
It's so influential.
Was it 37%? It's a huge percentage of people are coming from foreign countries. And
they pay significantly more in most cases.
Exactly. That's what this is about. And so So I think that's a smart way. If sometimes the Trump administration does things a little more bludgeony, right? Like you're talking about, trying to tell them how to teach their classes or something. I think that's not going to work under the First Amendment. But I do think visas. Now you're talking about something that the administration has a lot of authority over. It's foreign policy,
and it's not just the foreign students and the paying more. China has set up various sort of the Chinese cultural system or whatever it is they say at several universities, and they pump a lot of money in that. And then you have people in there who are able to sort of spread a pro-Chinese, pro-China
and
message.
Report back.
Report
China.
back and keep an eye on things and give them information.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, it's good that, he really leaves no stone unturned. Let's put it that way. Let's go now to this really sad story, and we'll just start it before the break. But in Washington, it was like a couple of nights ago, I think this happened, and it was a gunman who opened fire outside the Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. And I don't think he was necessarily looking for this couple, but the ones that got shot were Yaron Lashinsky and Sarah Milgram, a soon-to-be engaged couple, ages 30 and 26, who work at the Israeli embassy. But this was in the city, right inside this museum. They walked out and they were shot. I think there were 21 shots fired. This gunman was really, trying to make a statement, I think. And then he came back into the museum, apparently, and just said there's been a shooting. And then he was saying, he basically already admitted that he did it and he was proud of it and that he's been arrested. And so, it's very sad. It reeks of anti-Semitism. It reeks of terrorism. And this is what we posted the article by Andrew McCarthy from National Review that says he should get the death penalty, and this is terrorism.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Anyway, if you see the picture of this couple, and he had bought the engagement ring and was planning to, propose in a few days.
Yeah, they were going home to Israel to meet his family.
Yeah, and it's sad, but it's obviously a problem. And I was with Charlie Kirk a couple of months ago, and he said to the crowd that mainly people who are not young, who are older, that look. Well, there's a lot of things going on that are great with this next generation. They're starting to go to church, especially young males and all this. He said they're not as strong, and he said, look, I'm very strong pro. He's like, I'm very strong on this pro Jewish and Israel. He said, but I'm telling you, the people behind me are not as keyed into that at all, and it's kind of a warning. And so this is definitely something that is dangerous, what's kind of beginning to happen where people are being murdered, innocent people, just because of what their race is.
And I think it was, we talk about universities and we continue to discuss it. These campuses are actually fostering this atmosphere of anti-Semitism. We'll be right back.
In 19th century London, two towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Penna Dexter.
Welcome back to Point of View. We've just been talking about this soon-to-be engaged couple gunned down at the Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C. The shooter's name was Elias Rodriguez. He's from Chicago. And witnesses say that he yelled, "I did this for Gaza. There's only one solution, intifada." So, he announced it. He's in custody now. And it's just, it's very sad, and it just shows the anti-Semitic atmosphere that's been stirred up since the attack in Israel in 2023, and probably should have been dealt with in a stronger manner on the university campuses and other places. And this young man was a devout Christian, according to a friend. And he actually grew up in Germany until he was a teenager, and then he and his parents moved to Israel.
The young man who was shot.
Yes. And then Sarah Milgram, the young woman who was shot, apparently the shooter shot her a couple times and then just kept shooting her and just making a statement. She was already gone. But Lichinsky, the young man, had purchased a ring this week with the intention of proposing next week in Jerusalem. So it's a very sad story, and it's also a story of the problem that we're still dealing with of anti-Semitism.
Yes, and it's we were talking earlier about Kelly and First Liberty and their expansion of religious liberty. Even as there's this contradiction of religious liberty is expanding in some ways, getting something of a moment. At the same time, religious persecution is expanding, and not just here, but in England and other places, it's become really tense because of some of the things that are happening, especially from the pro-Palestinian groups.
And then this will definitely, I don't control the commission, but there will definitely be a hearing on all the attacks, all the anti-Semitic attacks, because part of religious freedom is. This is it's a great example. We have synagogue cases just at First Liberty all over the country. Yeah. They just want to be a synagogue, right? And they get treated in ways that you can't even imagine. And so this is a real problem. And as you say, Penna, one of the problems is this is fomented on these college campuses who are getting billions and billions of dollars of our taxpayer money. And so, thank goodness that the administration is saying, we're going to be pulling back our money unless you start, treating people right. You can't have people that because of their race or their religion can't even go to class. It's not safe. You tell them to stay home. That's just totally unacceptable. It is the responsibility of the Department of Justice to enforce these laws that guarantee that there's not religious and racial discrimination on college campuses. So that's what they're supposed to be doing. That's what the Biden administration, I thought it was disgraceful, the lack of enforcement of that. The DOJ was silent with regard. They should have been bringing legal actions and opening the way for people to be able to go to class, and they didn't. And so I'm glad that, again, as Merrill pointed out, sometimes the Trump administration goes a little too far in the process, but definitely something has to be done about this.
The idea that students, I think it was Columbia, would be told, well, maybe you just better go home for the semester because it's not safe for you here.
How about making it safe?
Yeah, and you're in New York, you've got the NYPD, you've got law enforcement that could have actually made the situation a lot safer if they'd been from on high, had those kinds of directives. And really, it's been years and decades of the kind of teaching that's taken place at some of these universities. Most state universities are very far to the left, and they've had the DEI influence, and I was just shocked at the amount of anti-Semitism, though, that just reared its ugly head after October of 2023.
You would think it'd go the other way after October 7th, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, things that we would never even imagine.
You had demonstrations in front of shops, a bagel shop, and other things like that in various cities, where somebody's in there. It's maybe a Jewish person who owns a shop, but is not involved in anything necessarily pro-Israel. It's just he's Jewish, and so it has become a real target. And ironically, with Columbia being in New York, I suspect they had a very heavy Jewish population among students, and that you wouldn't protect them. It's just a mystery to me.
It is. This guy, the shooter, he was part of the Socialism and Liberation. It's a party, Socialism and Liberation Party, a few years ago. And I don't know if he's still a member of it, but they make they have these anti-Israel type rallies. They organize them. So he was part of that. So that's where he's coming from.
And we were talking earlier about economic incentives, but there's all kinds of incentives out there. And if you allow people to do these rallies, they get a lot of media attention for that. They feel like they're spreading their message, and the university doesn't do anything about it. That is an economic incentive. That is an incentive for them to do something more next time. If we had a camp out here and we got a lot of attention and nobody stopped us, let's go raid a building and maybe put some graffiti in there and see if that gets more attention. You simply have to shut it down because of the incentives that you're creating by allowing this to go unpunished.
Absolutely. So, Kelly, we're talking about how this Religious Liberty Commission that you've been appointed to by President Trump, hopefully there's hearings and you deal with this issue of anti-Semitism, but it's one of the issues that, and we used to say, religious liberty is at risk around the world, but obviously this president, this White House sees that it needs to be strengthened here in the United States. I know Trump did some of that in his first term, but this is a huge step. It's located in the White House. And Kelly, just your appointment. I mean, I looked at that and said, wow, he's the only person from a religious liberty law firm that handles these cases. So do you feel, I think you have a lot to contribute.
I hope so. And, the great thing is a lot of these people, Dan Patrick is the chairman of the commission, is a lieutenant governor. I mean, he's in the middle of, a session right now, right? I mean, he's and it's not like he has a massive staff. I mean, most congressmen and senators, state and all that, they don't have a huge staff, right? Well, I've got the whole First Liberty team that can look into things, study things, look at what are possible things that should be covered and what are great witnesses and all these type of things. So it's an advantage. And so we're going to and that's really the way I feel. And, again, I don't necessarily wouldn't talk about this but on point of view I can because it's a Christian audience. I feel like God gave this opportunity. And so I want to fulfill it correctly, right? I want to do what the Lord wants us to do to really advance religious freedom, and not even just for 3 years, but for long term. And so there are a lot of choices, a lot of ideas, and we're just going to be doing everything we can to get out there. And I hope that it becomes something that people want to watch, like if they're they carry these live. And we cover these areas and have the type of witnesses. I mean, people who have been through this stuff. Because, I think most Americans have no idea what's going on out there if it hasn't happened to them. And when they begin to see these different cases, look at the parental rights victory we just got a week ago. People are starting to see that all across the country where their kids are being, are in these programs where they're pushing them towards things that every Christian would be against, and they're keeping it from the parents. And then when the parents, like in that, think of our Encina's case. They forced the fifth graders to read a book to the kindergartners, asking the kindergartners to question their gender. First, what evil is that, right? Well, in the instruction materials of training the teachers, it tells them not to tell the parents what they're doing. And so, now fortunately in our lawsuit, even with a liberal judge in California, the judge ruled in our favor that parents do have a right to notice, and they do have a right. The parents said, well, at the very least, we need to exempt our children from having to do this because this would violate their faith. They said no exemptions allowed. Well, the judge said the parents have authority over their children. They can get a religious exemption.
That was a big win.
That was. But these cases are all over the country. But how many Americans even know about them?
Yeah.
I mean, not everybody listens to Point of View and keeps up.
I think
right?
that's why people love our Friday show, because we report
and
on these cases.
The media don't cover them very often. I track the media all the time, and you very seldom hear this in the secular media.
And think of the Matthe case, which is before the Supreme Court right now, that's on this type of issue. We've got Muslim parents, Jewish parents, Christian parents, all saying, no, this is wrong. And the school's saying, children are children of the state. You don't control your kids. We do.
We'll find out.
And so there's a great opportunity to educate people, and hopefully the commission will have a long-term impact. It's the first time we've done this, and hopefully it'll have a long-term impact for religious freedom.
And we'll be right back. Planned Parenthood released its annual report right in the middle of House Republicans' effort to defund the organization. What timing? The report shows that in 2024, Planned Parenthood committed more abortions than the previous year and soaked in 13% more funding from the U.S. taxpayer. The $792 million U.S. taxpayers provided to Planned Parenthood is 39% of the organization's annual revenue. That makes the U.S. government Planned Parenthood's largest contributor. Planned Parenthood was responsible for 402,000 abortions last year, over 1,100 per day. Some states have zeroed out Planned Parenthood funding, but as the report points out, Planned Parenthood helps women from pro-life states travel to get abortions. The Hyde Amendment supposedly prevents taxpayers from having to fund abortions, but Planned Parenthood receives Medicaid funding, ostensibly to pay for certain health services for poor women. Provision of those services decreased significantly last year. Professor Michael New told the Washington Stand cancer screenings are down 8%, pap smears dropped 12%, and primary care visits declined 14%, while abortions increased. According to Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America, pregnant women seeking help at Planned Parenthood are sold an abortion 97% of the time, while prenatal services, miscarriage care, and adoption referrals make up a minuscule minority of the options they offer. As part of the budget reconciliation package, the House Energy and Commerce Committee approved language to end federal funding to any entity that performs or facilitates abortions. Planned Parenthood refers to itself as the nation's second largest provider of hormone therapy. The Daily Signal reported on Live Action's recent undercover investigations, which reveal that Planned Parenthood is providing minors with same-day prescriptions for cross-sex hormones. The reconciliation bill's language also removes funding for these gruesome activities. It's time for Congress to completely defund Planned Parenthood for good. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. One of the pieces of good news in the big, beautiful bill that passed the House of Representatives was the defunding of Planned Parenthood. My commentary this week is defunded already. And, you would have thought, because we talk about it all the time, the funding of Planned Parenthood, the defunding would have been done by now. Mm-hmm. But it's actually been more federal funding has continued to go to Planned Parenthood. And we have something called the Hyde Amendment, which means taxpayers aren't supposed to have to pay for Planned Parenthood and for abortions. But Planned Parenthood touts all the quote-unquote services it provides. breast cancer screenings, pap smears, even counseling for adoption. But all of this is minuscule compared to the abortions that they do. And so this time Congress was having none of it. They defunded Planned Parenthood. And a lot of this funding comes through Medicaid, which we talked about earlier. So I think it's really good news. And the funding was this last fiscal year was $792 million, 1/3 of the $2 billion budget of Planned Parenthood. And so they defunded to the tune of that much per year. And so it's good to see that. I know there have been fights over it, and some of our pro-life stalwarts in the Senate, like Ted Cruz, have been fighting for Planned Parenthood defunding. I don't think the Senate's going to pull this out when they look at this big beautiful bill.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if they phased it out over time anyway, as opposed to just a flat cut, because that makes it a little easier, and that may give the Democrats a bit of a talking point to be able. But this goes what goes on behind closed doors is they're trying to negotiate things, and Republicans say we need this, and then Democrats say, well, if we're going to give you that, we need this. Of course, it's probably going to end up being that no Democrat will vote for this, but they oftentimes try to do that in the negotiation just to see how far they can go.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's, the overall on the bill is, number one, we're still spending more money than we're taking in.
Oh, huge amount.
Right?
And it increases what we're spending.
And this is why Moody is downgraded us, right? So this is bad. And we've got a problem. And I'll be honest with you, the problem is the American people. I mean, because Congress is doing this because, if they try to actually rein in spending, they'll be thrown out of office.
Oh, it's
all free money to everybody out there, and so really it's the American people's problem, and they should be insisting, that Congress stop, throwing us over into bankruptcy. I mean, we're getting really dangerous. I mean, being downgraded by Moody is just one of many signs of that. So that's the bad part. The good part is that, number one, the fiscal hawks, the more conservatives, the Chip Roys, et cetera, did fight for as much cutting as they could get. But they had to get this through because otherwise the tax cut would not have happened. And we would have had a massive tax increase on the whole country, not just rich people, everybody. And so that's the good news, is that is going to get through, right? And then the other good news is more of these little things that I say little, they're not that little, but they're just kind of not a part of the big discussion. The Planned Parenthood, the fact that $800 million, a year. I mean, gosh, how many lives are going to be saved, right? How many people are going to be alive because of that? The whole thing with the courts and what's going on there. And I have a feeling there will be more things that we will find out about that, again, because the conservatives kind of have control of this, it won't be a liberal thing. It'll be a more conservative thing that's put in there. And we'll see what extra things there are. But it's not a perfect bill, for sure.
And one of the things that may happen is that the Planned Parenthood then goes to private donors out there, the George Soroses of the world, and say, will you help make up some of that shortfall? And that may happen, but that means those funders have less money to spend trying to fight some of the other things that they've been doing.
Yeah, they're getting hit on both ends. First, USAID is not funneling money to their groups, and then now they're cutting directly from the budget things that they were getting, like $800 million.
And so Bill Gates, for instance, has stepped up and said he's going to fund a number of those things that USAID might have funded, but won't be able to fund. But then that's less money Bill Gates has to spend in other places that may or may not be good from our standpoint.
Also on the international level with Marco Rubio in the State Department, the funding of international Planned Parenthood, abortions worldwide, the LGBT agenda, that's drying up too. Just one more topic that took place this week that came to light was, of course, the pretty aggressive cancer the former President Biden has, and people, wondering, well, how much did they know? Did he not get diagnosed all these last 10 years or whatever, or did he, and did he hide it? Did some kind of testosterone treatment cause his dementia? there's so many questions about it. I don't know.
I don't know either.
Yeah, I can't imagine why people would ask whether he was hiding some medical condition.
Yeah, you just got to wonder.
So Zeke Emanuel, an oncologist and brother of Rahm Emanuel, who may end up being a Democratic presidential candidate, has said, and he was actually Biden's...
He was in the Clinton administration, Rahm Emanuel.
Yeah, Rahm Emanuel was in the Clinton administration, and Zeke Emanuel, I think, was serving as Biden's doctor for a little while. But he said chances are he had this before he announced it, for some time before he left office, and probably even before he won the presidency, which raises the question why, because a PSA test is how they test for this, blood test, doctors are coming out and say, they don't always do it for men over age 70 or 75. He's the president of the United States. Yeah. He's the president of the United States. It's a simple test. You're taking the blood anyway. So what it does, and the bad thing about this is it undermines the confidence that we can believe things coming out of the White House even more. So it's a real problem, both from Biden's standpoint, but also from just the public's confidence in what they are hearing.
Well, you add that, and you add the Her interview,
yes.
Which people can now listen to the audio of, and again, I don't think we need any of that. I mean, everybody's was watching Biden, 5 years ago or whatever, and going, this guy's not all there, and he'd, they'd put him up at a podium and he would just stop or stammer, and he would look lost when it was time for him to leave, and people knew what was going on, and this is one of the reasons why the media lost their credibility so much. And now
they're covering up by writing books about it.
Yeah, now they're acting like, oh my gosh, I was so fooled. It was like, well, okay, you're not that stupid. None of us believe that, because we could all see it.
And all of those media people have contacts within the administration,
yes.
and would have heard from some of those people, even if it's off the record. They would have known that was going on.
And so this is really just confirming what Americans really realized in the last election, because they were also being told the economy was good. When they were getting crushed, and inflation had gone up, over those 4 years. Mm-hmm. I mean, people were paying double for their homes. They were paying double for their cars. They were paying they knew, and yet they just lie in the media, and so they really lost their credibility. And this is all part of it. So when you hear that Biden has this, everybody's immediately, oh, that's horrible, but they're also they don't believe that they weren't told. And I don't know the answer to that. I mean, this certainly weren't telling people about a lot of other things, and that's not how it should be.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've covered the gamut today here on Point of View. Thank you so much, Kelly and Merrill, for being here to do that with your expertise and the things that you do during the week that people don't see and that we're starting to know about. We ask that this would be an audience of prayer. There are many things to pray about and be concerned about in this country, and we certainly have some progress in some areas, so we're glad to see that. So thank you very much, Megan, for running the board. Thank you, Steve, for producing the show, and Karen for operating the website. And we hope and pray you have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. God bless you.
It almost seems like we live in a different world from many people in positions of authority. They say men can be women and women men. People are prosecuted differently or not at all, depending on their politics. Criminals are more valued and rewarded than law-abiding citizens. It's so overwhelming, so demoralizing. You feel like giving up. But we can't. We shouldn't. We must not. As Winston Churchill said to Britain in the darkest days of World War II, never give in, never give in, never, 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 never yield to force, never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. And that's what we say to you today. This is not a time to give in, but to step up and join Point of View in providing clarity in the chaos. We can't do it alone, but together, with God's help, we will overcome the darkness. Invest in biblical clarity today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.